The guy in the middle, holding the turtle, Rick Scott, Republican governor of Florida. Rick Scott reportedly has not shown up at the Florida State Capitol building for 9 days. He reportedly has not been to his own office, the governor's office in Tallahassee, for at least 3 days. Rick Scott does not seem to be missing because of some kind of foul play or hiking the Appalachian Trail or anything like that. Rather, Rick Scott has seemed to be in hiding from this. A whole bunch of mostly young citizens of his state camped out at his office protesting, saying they want to meet with the governor and they want him to call the Florida legislature back into session, into a special legislative session to consider what they are calling the Trayvon Martin Civil Rights Act. With that act, they want lawmakers and Governor Scott to repeal Florida's Stand Your Ground law, the law that says who gets to shoot whom in Florida and under what circumstances. These protesters marched into Rick Scott's office on Tuesday of this week. They announced that they would not leave until they got a meeting with the governor himself. That first night, Tuesday night, about 30 people spent the night in the governor's office. The second night, last night, it went up to about 50 people spending the night in the governor's office. Tonight, Thursday night, we are told it is closer to 70 people rolling out sleeping bags and planning to stay all night. The Capitol Police in Tallahassee have so far said that these protesters are free to stay as long as they do not interrupt official business. So they are staying, and their occupation is getting larger in Rick Scott's office. Rick Scott, meanwhile, has been traveling around the country and traveling around the state, traveling anywhere but his office, with all those people who are there who want to talk to him about that thing that he desperately would like to stop talking about. Today, Rick Scott turned up in Tampa, Florida. And he told people who were traveling with him, told the reporters who were following him, that he would take some questions. Naturally, when he went to take questions, the first one was about Stand Your Ground. Governor Scott said the same thing he has been saying about Stand Your Ground all these many months. He said that everybody should mourn Trayvon Martin's death. He said also that a task force that he commissioned to look into the Stand Your Ground law has already made its ruling. It's already said that the state should keep it, and he agrees.
I put together a task force of 19 individuals, bipartisan. They travel the state, they listen to ordinary citizens, they listen to experts, and they concluded that we didn't need to make a change to the law, and I agree with their conclusion.
Thank you.
Yep.
Governor,
thanks everybody.
Will you call a special session, Governor, on civil rights? Will you call a special session, Governor, on civil rights?
Governor, why are you in such a hurry to leave?
What's the rush, Governor? Just one question, really? As Governor Rick Scott's grand tour of anywhere that is not his office continues, Democrats have begun to call for Governor Rick Scott to please come home. A pair of state lawmakers today challenged the governor to come home to his office to talk to the protesters there, saying Governor Christ would have done that, Governor Bush would have done that. Why can't Governor Scott do that? Those lawmakers also said today that they are supporting the protesters' call for a special legislative session to reconsider that Stand Your Ground law. Quoting one of the lawmakers today, Florida likes to tout being first. Well, we were at the front end of the line to implement this Stand Your Ground law. We should be the first to repeal it. We were at the front to implement it. We should be first to repeal. You know, it is true that Florida was the first state in the country to pass the modern iteration of the Stand Your Ground law. Stand Your Ground, of course, says basically if somebody makes you feel afraid, you can shoot them. You don't have to bother to remove yourself from the situation or anything. If you feel afraid, go ahead and use force. You're good. And Florida passed that law in April 2005. It had been the NRA's top priority that year. Then Florida Governor Jeb Bush signed the bill with an NRA lobbyist standing at his side. You can see that actually here. The lobbyist standing there in the blue jacket, her name is Marion Hammer. She is the NRA's top lobbyist in Florida, and Stand Your Ground was her law. It was the NRA's law. And the NRA was very, very proud of it once Jeb Bush signed it into law. They bragged about how this law they'd gotten passed in Florida was going to be a national model. From press accounts at the time, quote, Wayne LaPierre of the NRA says his group will introduce the bill in every state. We will start with the red states and we will move to the blue states. The NRA wanted to roll this law out everywhere and they prioritized it. So Florida went first, but then in short order, 21 other states had passed some version of this Stand Your Ground law. They started with Florida in 2005 and look how far they got. The NRA had incredible momentum on this. But as they moved along, winning in the states, those states were starting to feel the effect of those laws, of what living under laws like that means for the states. In Florida, where they tried it first, so they had the longest experience with it, the Tampa Bay Times started studying stand your ground cases. They found what they called shocking outcomes. One man killed 2 people who were not armed. He got acquitted. Under stand your ground in Florida, you could be acquitted even if you shot somebody who was lying on the ground. You could also be acquitted for shooting somebody in the back of the head. The Tampa Bay newspaper said it was impossible to know how many stand your ground cases Florida had, but it appears to be several hundred, and of the ones they could track, nearly 70% of the accusers in these cases went free. So that was the lived experience of stand your ground in Florida after the NRA got the first new stand your ground law on the books. Nationwide, it looked like this. This is the number of legally determined justifiable homicides in the country at the start of the NRA's campaign. And here's what happened after the other states piled on. Right? More people can shoot more people in this country with impunity from 2005 on up. But never mind, it was full steam ahead for the NRA and stand your ground. This is what they wanted. Full steam ahead, keep passing those laws until February 26, 2012, when they lost their momentum because a neighborhood watch volunteer shot and killed Trayvon Martin, who had been walking home in the rain wearing a hoodie and carrying iced tea in a bag of Skittles. There would be no arrest in the case for 6 weeks, even though there was no doubt as to who had pulled the trigger. The shooter said he had acted in self-defense. And of course, self-defense in Florida now is stand your ground. A lot of the country was outraged about this case, outraged about the handling of this case in Florida, outraged that the shooter was not being arrested. He's not being arrested. How can it be that he's not being arrested? We all learned quickly because Florida has this law, this stand your ground law, the lady in the blue jacket, right? And it turns out it's not just Florida. Florida was first, but now basically everybody has this law. Why does everybody all of a sudden have this law? This seems new. Where did this law come from in all these states that not many people had noticed before this marquee case in Florida suddenly shocked everybody with its implications in this case? The law came from something called ALEC. These force for force, stand your ground, defend your castle laws may have been an NRA priority, but the way the NRA pushed them was through the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC for short. You can see here the legislative scorecard from ALEC for model legislation. The Castle Doctrine, which is stand your ground, is right there on the ALEC list. This chilling marquee case in Florida attracts enough outrage that the big mainstream corporate interests that belonged to ALEC started to get embarrassed to be associated with the law, right? Because the uproar was not just about Florida. Once people realized what this law was and how it had spread, it was not just about the NRA or the stand your ground law. It's about the way the law had been written as model legislation by this group that the NRA and all of these corporations were part of. And the corporations, these other constituent members of ALEC, beyond the NRA, they started to get embarrassed about being associated with this. Why on earth does Kraft Foods want to shoot first and ask questions later bill on its legislative agenda? So Kraft Foods, drops their membership from ALEC, which had been pushing all these stand your ground laws. PepsiCo drops their membership from ALEC. Coca-Cola drops their membership from ALEC. Mainstream household name companies start dropping out of ALEC one after another. And then finally, ALEC announces, okay, we are getting out of the stand your ground business. We are eliminating our Public Safety and Elections Task Force. I mean, why would Pepsi be working on gun laws, right? Didn't make any sense. And so ALEC, when they got the pressure, started to see the pressure manifest as its corporate sponsors dropping out, and ALEC thereby dropped the issue. But the laws do not go away. And in fact, the NRA stays as much a part of ALEC as ever. They kept on, the NRA, doing a trap shooting event with ALEC at ALEC's recent convention, sponsored by the machine gun maker, Browning Arms Company. The NRA remained very much a part of ALEC. And now, with the protesters camped out at Rick Scott's office, and with Florida sort of the birthplace of the stand your ground law, and with Rick Scott refusing thus far to go back to his office because apparently he does not want to talk about this stuff, the power of the NRA is once again back at the center of American politics, the way it has been since December, since the mass shooting at that elementary school in Newtown, Connecticut. What happened in Florida is a different tragedy from what happened in Newtown, but it turns out that while the impetus might be different, the fight is the same, and the adversary is the same. And all of the anti-NRA outrage and anti-NRA work that we have seen as a nation since the Newtown tragedy, it matters all over again, right? I mean, the Newtown families continuing to lobby members of Congress, continuing to lobby in the states, pushing on after even losing that big Senate vote. Just this week, Newtown families, here's Francine Wheeler, taking her case to states like Pennsylvania that are considering changes in their gun laws. Now joined by a new group dressing up at one point in cow costumes recently and saying it's time to stop being cowed by the NRA. And Congresswoman Gabby Giffords and her husband, the astronaut Mark Kelly, visiting 7 states in 7 days, making the case for gun reform. The Congressional Black Caucus saying they're ready to legislate against Stand Your Ground, encouraging President Obama to not give up on the issue despite the uphill fight. Right, there's been all of this work to organize against the NRA since Newtown. On the other side, the NRA is standing there in the wake of the Trayvon Martin outrage saying, yeah, we're going to defend Stand Your Ground. This is our law. If Stand Your Ground is going to fall, it's going to be because the forces arrayed against the NRA are stronger than they have ever been. And they are stronger than they have ever been for a lot of reasons. Are they strong enough now to make a difference? Moments ago on this network, a member of the group that is camped outside the Florida governor's office said he just now got a phone call from the governor. He says the governor told him that he will finally meet with the protesters tonight. Maybe the governor just wants his office back, or maybe there is room here for something to change. Joining us now is Mark Caputo. He's a political columnist for the Miami Herald. Mr. Caputo, thanks very much for being with us. It's nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So you have written about the role of Stand Your Ground in the overall Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman case. You have also written that regardless of the outrage and all the pressure, nobody should expect this law to change. Are you at all surprised to hear the governor at least wants to talk to the protesters in his office about it tonight?
Well, no. I mean, I think they've made it quite clear that they're going to stay there for quite some time. So if they stay in his office and they increase in numbers, eventually he's going to have to address them. In 2006, a similar group, the forerunners of this group, held a sit-in when Jeb Bush was governor. That was regarding the death of a young man named Martin Lee Anderson. And what happened there is they stayed, and Jeb Bush finally met with some of the folks. And then they went away. And I think Rick Scott has kind of gotten the message.
In thinking about the power of the NRA, you know, when this initially passed, it was not at all a subtle thing, right? That with the Jeb Bush, it was NRA language. Jeb Bush signed the law with the NRA lobbyists standing next to him. The NRA proudly touted this as something that they not only got done in Florida, but that they were going to get done all the way across the country. It was clear that this was something, the authorship here was very clear. Has the political power of the NRA changed at all relative to its opponents since Newtown, since the sort of repoliticization of guns in this country after that tragedy in Connecticut?
Well, we haven't seen any evidence of that changing in Florida. Understand, Florida has very urban areas, Miami, Tampa, Jacksonville, but it's still a southern state in many of its sympathies, and part of that is gun culture. Florida was nicknamed the gunshine state for a reason. I mean, we like guns here. There's 1.15 million concealed weapon permit holders. So that's a pretty big constituency. That doesn't mean that common sense gun reform is resisted by all gun owners or potential gun owners. But right now, the economic interests are favoring the the proponents of more gun rights. The folks who oppose gun rights or want to scale back gun rights or want to have more gun control, if you will, they really have an uphill battle. Understand the legislature is overwhelmingly Republican. Democrats barely have about 36–37% of the seats on average in the House and the Senate together. And the governor's office is controlled by a Republican. So the first thing is the Democrats have to find a candidate and probably win the governor's office and then slowly chip back and win in the legislature. And even if they do that, there are going to be Democrats who represent rural areas who probably won't want to change because a lot of their constituents favor having fewer gun restrictions. And the last Quinnipiac poll in Florida showed that Stand Your Ground was favored by a majority of Florida voters, and a smaller percentage, obviously, favored repealing it or changing it.
Because of the national attention to this case, and because Florida's pioneering stand your ground law ended up being copied and done in a lot of other states, almost 24 other states around the country almost, a lot of people are looking at the George Zimmerman verdict and the Trayvon Martin case in general and hearing very conflicted analysis as to whether or not stand your ground is important, was determinative even, as to what happened in that case. Watch the case. Is in Florida to the case the way it was decided.
Remember this, is that stand your ground is self-defense in Florida. If you have a self-defense defense in Florida, it's a stand your ground defense, especially in lethal force cases. This was a lethal force case. Therefore, stand your ground has something to do with it. Was it determinative? Well, we don't know. We weren't in the jury room. But we do know this, is that the jury instructions had almost word for word stand your ground language. And juror B37 told CNN that they had discussed stand your ground. In fact, she twice, of her own accord, mentioned stand your ground. So for anyone to say stand your ground had nothing to do with the case, it's strange. It's false. It's like, you know, on my end, it's almost like describing a sphere to a flat Earth Society person. I just can't understand why they say it has absolutely nothing to do with it. It is an argument of degree, but we don't know the degree, but it had something to do with it. Also understand this about stand your ground, a big change it made. Before it passed in 2005, Florida had what many states had, which was a duty to retreat when you were in a confrontation in public. If you were lawfully in an area and some guy comes up and picks a fight with you, you actually had a duty to retreat before using lethal force. The phrase was you had a duty to retreat, quote, to the wall. Well, they changed that, and they said you had a right to stand your ground and meet force with force anywhere in public, assuming you were lawfully there and you were engaged in lawful activity. So again, stand your ground certainly had something to do with this case. How much? We don't know, but it certainly had something to do with it.
Mark Caputo, political columnist for the Miami Herald. Thank you very much for your time tonight, Mark. I'm going to send you a new earpiece as thanks for you being here.
I'm sorry about that. I was smiling too much. I apologize.
It's all right. I appreciate you being here, man. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, lots and lots to come tonight, including the most important drip in the drip saga of skeeviness involving Virginia's Governor Ultrasound. The biggest drip yet.